What's in a name? If we're reading the Torah portions for this and last week, apparently a lot. We're in the book of Shemot, which those of you who were here last week will remember means names. This week's Torah portion, Va'era, begins with names. God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am Yud-He Vav-He. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by my name, Yud-He Vav-He. Actually, I doubt that God spelled out the divine name, but there is a problem in recounting these verses. Jewish tradition prohibits pronouncing the tetragrammaton, that is, the four-letter name of God. So we typically substitute the Hebrew word Adonai, which means Lord, and among some Jews, even that is substituted out, except in prayer. For them, when they come across the tetragrammaton in any context other than in the prayer book, they say Hashem, which means simply the name. Moses was probably not bound by the restriction to avoid pronouncing Yud-He Vav-He, but he had his own language problems. In the last parasha, God had appeared to him at the burning bush and instructed him to go and speak to the Israelites. Moses had resisted until finally bowing, if not to God's arguments, then to God's superior force. And so far it hasn't been going well. The Egyptians had been able to replicate the miracles that he was doing, and the Israelites were too oppressed to listen to them. Among the arguments that Moses had used to try to persuade God to send someone else to free the Israelites was this: Kvar pei uchvar lashon anochi. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. Though, of course, as they point out in Fiddler, for someone who is slow of speech and slow of tongue, he seems to have talked a lot. But anyway, the commentators had different opinions of what Moses meant by this. Don Isaac Abravanel took him literally. Moses had a speech impediment. According to Abravanel, he had a lip problem that prevented him from saying some sounds clearly. Others saw Moses speaking more metaphorically about himself. Abraham ibn Ezra took his comments as meaning, I'm not a smooth talker as one needs to be before a king. For him, Moses just thought he couldn't give a good speech. Rabbi Samuel ben Meir, known as the Rashbam, said that Moses was saying that he spoke Egyptian poorly. He had fled to Midian when he was young, and his vocabulary had suffered. Rashbam goes on to say why Moses could not have had a speech impediment. Could one possibly believe that a prophet who knew God face to face and received the Torah directly from God's hand was a stutterer? Moses, after all, lived to be 120 years, with his eyes undimmed and his vigor unabated. He couldn't possibly have had a disability. A few weeks ago, Eileen and I represented our temple at the kickoff dinner and program of the Ruderman Synagogue Inclusion Project. We were among 500 people who filled the room at Temple Emmanuel in Newton to capacity. The Ruderman Project is, in effect, a response to Rashbam. There is nothing that we as a Jewish community should close off to people with disabilities. Our temple is now an affiliate of the project, and we look forward to spending this year finding ways to make ourselves more open. We've already begun. Did you happen to notice the door when you came in? It no longer has a doorknob. Standard doorknobs are a barrier to entry for many people with disabilities. Instead, it has a handle, which only needs to be pushed, not grasped. That change came in part from the project's own entry requirement, an inclusion inventory of the temple. It required us to look at all the ways people interact with our synagogue to determine if we have unwittingly made such interactions more difficult or impossible for people with disabilities. When we make ourselves more open, it's not just for the disabled. It's for all of us. There is a principle called universal design. This calls upon those looking at an environment to consider in great detail all the ways it can be used and to make sure that everyone who wants to can access it. The inclusion inventory was certainly based on this principle. As one advocate of universal design has written, this is not a special requirement for the benefit of only a minority of the population. It is a fundamental condition of good design. If an environment is accessible, usable, convenient, and a pleasure to use, everyone benefits. A couple of years ago, someone posted a picture of peeled oranges wrapped in plastic. They were for sale at Whole Foods. The poster added the requisite internet snark. If only nature would find a way to cover these oranges so that we didn't need to waste so much plastic on them. It went viral. People pushed on Whole Foods for damaging the environment just to enable people who were too lazy to peel their oranges. The store quickly pulled the product. Those who created this product may well have been trying to sell oranges to those unwilling to take the time to peel them. But they aren't the only market for pre-peeled oranges. Kim Sonder, a PhD candidate in disability studies, has limited hand dexterity. In her blog, Crippled Scholar, she wrote that preparing food with limited mobility is both hugely time-consuming and potentially dangerous. As for the fact that this product wasn't designed for the disabled, she writes, things that are accidentally accessible are marketed and available to everyone, and thus likely to be more easily available. They allow people like her to live more independently and still eat a healthy diet. Ideally, of course, there should be universal design, something that intentionally allows everyone to participate in as many aspects of life as possible. But the story of the orange helps to get us thinking about how we can do that. At our synagogue, you may have also noticed the microphones that we're using. This is not here because Jim Buja wanted to demonstrate his engineering skills, although those skills have been invaluable. Well, maybe. It's true that we survived for years without voice amplification in the building. I certainly know how to speak loudly. But I've learned that for people with hearing loss, nothing short of amplification can allow them to hear what's said in a crowded room. There is much more that we can do to open up our congregation, but at least now we can start to know what to look for. So back to names. When God first tells Moses that the divine name is Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, God gives an explanation. God says the name is related to the phrase Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, I am what I am. In this way, God connects the name to the Hebrew word for be, to be, which is Chaya. There are Heys and Yuds in common between the two words. Professor Israel Knoll of Hebrew University in Jerusalem, a well-respected scholar, has recently written that the Tetragrammaton has a different origin. Picking up the work of earlier scholars, Knoll suggests that it comes from an Arabic word, hawaya, meaning love, desire, or affection. You read his article to see how he gets from one place to another. Moses may have had a stutter or a speech impediment of some sort, but this did not prevent him from speaking to and for God. The God whose name means love could hear him, with not just open ears, but an open heart. That God would give him the courage to take up his task in this world, even if that meant speaking in public. We behave most like God if we too can make our community open to all with disabilities. We do it not because they deserve special treatment, but because they deserve to be just like everyone else, loved because they and we, and they are we, that we are all part of a community that serves the living and loving God. Ken Yehi Ratzon, be this God's will.